We've all done it at some point in our lives, basking in the glory of a hypothetical victory or moment, thinking about how tough we are, trash talking, and threatening to hand our opponent their own butt. But let's face the music. We all know it is what it is, just trash talk. But nobody seems to have told these MMA fighters, and soon they were hiding their faces in shame. Starting with BJ Penn versus Joe Stevenson. The original plan for the BJ Penn-Joe Stevenson bout was for an interim title, but when Sean Sherk was stripped of his title, the match escalated into a legit title match. In what would be the biggest opportunity for Stevenson since winning the Ultimate Fighter, he pulled a no-show and offered nothing against Penn. Besides the insane beating he took, this match was very embarrassing for Joe, as the image of him crying while bleeding all over his face is an image that's been burned into the memory of MMA fans. Yikes, talk about embarrassing. What's worse is that there are still memes about it, so it's pretty much become a part of MMA history. Guess all that confidence and talk before the match didn't come in handy, Joe. We can't forget about Tim Sylvia versus Andrei Arlovski 3. This match was iconic for all the wrong reasons, but at least it provided us with some form of entertainment. Right? The rubber match between Tim Sylvia and Andrei Arlovski was supposed to feature some fireworks. The first two matches certainly did. We were instead treated to a 5-round heavyweight title match. There's a reason most heavyweight fights don't go to a decision. Most tend to willingly engage one another. Instead, Sylvia seemed content to sit in his rocking chair behind a jab, and Arlovski seemed too timid to be aggressive after getting dropped in their second contest. And if you didn't see this legendary match, we suggest you check out your local shuffleboard tournament. There's probably more action there than in this embarrassment of a match. And how can we skip Derek Lewis? Oh, Derek, how we've missed your commentary. The Black Beast has garnered quite the reputation for his ridiculous, over-the-top post-fight comments. While the number 2 ranked UFC heavyweight can often be very funny, he can also go off into incomprehensible territory. And that's exactly what happened during UFC Fight Night 105. The fighter knocked out Travis Browne in round 2 of their February 2017 clash. Despite a vicious assault to the body by Browne, Lewis stood tall, though with a hand over his pain-stricken midsection. When asked about the pain his stomach was clearly in, he claimed he was simply in dire need of a number 2. Yeah, we know. From there, Lewis trailed off in several curious directions. Everything from distasteful jibes about Travis's personal life and legal troubles to his own need for a 3-month vacation from the fighting game came up. And then at one point, Derek decided now was the best time to bring up his life, for reasons that only he knew. We don't know what was going on in his mind at that moment, but eventually he ended up with the short end of the stick when Travis called him out on it. And while he might have won the physical fight, he lost the social media war. Next up, McGregor and Dustin Poirier. Well, we're not really surprised by this one. Notorious is notorious for his trash talk. McGregor's antics here were probably the closest MMA has ever come to the Black Knight scene from Monty Python's The Holy Grail. Grounded with a broken ankle, the just-defeated fighter went on an epic tirade when Joe Rogan asked him for his thoughts. At one point, despite having just one leg to stand on, Conor suggested he and Dustin Poirier take the fight outside. Clearly furious, the Irishman laid in further digs about Poirier's wife and exclaimed, "This is not over." The Notorious claimed to have been dominating the fight right up until his ankle snapped. While the round had clearly been competitive, the notion that McGregor was all offense throughout is simply not true. We all know that it was Dustin's half kick that did all the damage, so all that trash talk before and after the match wasn't just akin to a dog barking but not being able to bite. It was genuinely embarrassing. While Conor's anger over losing in such a freak of nature manner is understandable, his behavior here did nothing to paint him in a positive light. It was made all the worse by the fact that he'd vowed to send Poirier out on a stretcher beforehand. Well, that sucks. Then there's Randy Couture and Tito Ortiz. After this match, Tito learned a really difficult lesson. Don't open your mouth when you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, and never underestimate your opponent. Here's the thing. Ortiz believed that the old man Randy Couture had nothing to beat him with when they squared off at UFC 44. The next 25 minutes would be a lesson in respect, as Couture dominated the much younger Ortiz en route to a unanimous decision win. Unable to mount any offense against Father Time, Ortiz positioned himself for a desperation leg lock, only to see himself get even more embarrassed as Randy spanked him. Wish we could make a joke about him being grounded, but looks like he was, at least when it comes to humility. And little did Hardy know about little. Never judge a book by its cover. This is something Don Hardy learned the hard way. Dan made another special request when he called out Chris Little because he felt Little would stand and bang with him. Chris, ever the competitor, obliged, even though he has excellent ground skills. Not only did Hardy get outclassed in the stand-up, but then he shot in for takedowns during the later minutes of the fight. He embarrassed himself by hand-picking yet another opponent and by going for a takedown when he spent weeks giving excuses and saying how wrestlers in MMA are boring. Well, we only have one thing to say to that. There was nothing boring about that match. Next up, the all-star Alistair Overeem. When Fabricio Werdum and Alistair Overeem met each other for a second time, most of the talk focused on if Werdum could last long enough on the feet to get the bout to the ground. When the two men finally stepped into the cage, the ensuing bout was one of the weirdest ever put on TV. The fight saw Werdum flop to the ground more than Vlade Divac and beg for Overeem to politely jump into his guard. What made the fight even weirder and embarrassing for Fabricio was that he was winning the majority of striking exchanges and still deemed it necessary to flail on the ground, begging Alistair to follow. Fabricio seemed pretty confident at first, saying that he had what it takes to take his opponent down. And while he did at first, the match ended up in a very embarrassing moment for the guy. And Alistair strikes again. Brett Rogers had a history of underestimating his opponents and of DV, so we're not surprised or sorry about what happened here. The man seems too over his head sometimes. Well, understandably so, because he was on his way to becoming one of the best MMA fighters in the industry, but he eventually lost and was completely wrecked by Alistair Overeem in the next fight. These two losses seem to set Rogers into a downward spiral that has made him one of the most disliked fighters in the game. What made the bout embarrassing for him was that after finding some initial success in his bout against the immortal Fedor Emelianenko, Brett seemed like a scared child against Overeem. Rogers was tossed with an impressive Muay Thai trip and thoroughly beaten from bell to bell. If only Alistair had a woman's wig on, Brett would have had no problem hitting him then. And then we have Brian Stann and Chris Leben. Oh, Leben, why are you like this? Chris Leben didn't believe Brian Stann would offer any resistance in their matchup at UFC 125. Chris would be quoted as saying Stann couldn't punch his way out of a wet paper bag. A few minutes into the match, he felt his opponent punch his way through his head and subsequently knock Leben to the canvas. For not having any punching power or ability, Brian certainly didn't have a problem finding the crippler's chin and laying leather to face. And finally, BJ Penn versus George St. Pierre 2. For weeks leading up to their climactic showdown, lightweight champion BJ Penn told fans he believed welterweight champion George St. Pierre was a quitter and didn't work hard. He went on to call him lazy and some other things. Then Penn did the unthinkable and quit between rounds. Besides the fact it was a champion versus champion bout and a rematch of a highly competitive fight, Penn was outclassed in every facet of the match. He was busy trying to convince us GSP was the one who would falter, only to see the look of doubt creep onto his face more and more as each minute passed by. If that's not embarrassing, we don't know what is. And that's a wrap. What do you think about these fighters? Which embarrassing moment was your favorite? Let us know in the comments. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more similar videos. See you in the next one.